Okay, for this method of adding integers, what we're going to do is we're going to diagram the problem, and then we're going to ask ourselves, which do we have more of? And that's going to give us our answer. So let's take a look at one here. So let's do the problem. Positive 5 plus negative 3. Now, you don't always have to put positives in front of the ones that are positives, but we're going to do that here. And it's going to help us really outline the positives and the negatives. So on this one, step one is we're going to draw 5 positives. We're going to draw one positive sign for each of these numbers. So since we have positive 5, we're going to draw 5 positives. Next, for each negative, we're going to draw a negative sign. And we're going to identify the ones that cancel out. And we call these zero pairs. Zero because they cancel out, pairs because there's a pair there. So in this case, we have 3 zero pairs. Go ahead and write that out. 3 zero pairs. And whatever's left over, notice these 2 positives that aren't canceled out, whatever's left over, that is our answer. So in this case, our answer is positive 2. All right, let's try another one. Let's take the problem positive 2 plus negative 6. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to draw our 2 positives. Here's our positive 2. The top line is always what you start with. The second line is always what you add to it. We're going to add 6 negatives. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 negatives. Let's figure out how many zero pairs there are. Here there are 2 zero pairs. And these 4 are left over. These 4 aren't connected to any positives. They're not canceled out by anything, which means our answer is negative 4. I bet you're starting to get the hang of this already, aren't you? Okay, let's do one more. Let's try negative 3 plus negative 1. So we start out with 3 negatives. We're going to add one more negative. Now notice here, there's nothing to cancel out. You can't do this. Do not. You do not do that. A negative and another negative don't cancel out to a 0. The only way you can get a 0 is a positive with a negative. So here, all 4 of those are left over. And since all 4 of those are left over, our answer is negative 4. So if you add negative 3 to negative 1, you get negative 4. Yep, and I noticed here after I got all the way through this problem, I noticed back here I forgot to identify my zero pairs. So let's go back and do that because that's what we want to do as a habit here. We want to identify how much is canceling out. In this last one we did, there are actually no zero pairs. So write that on your practice sheet. Here there are no zero pairs. Anytime both of these are negatives, there's nothing that cancels out. In the same way that if you had the problems that you did back when you were a little kid, and this isn't on your practice sheet, but if I said what's positive 1 plus positive 3, you know that that's positive 4. That would be a positive and then 3 more positives, which would be everything is positive, and you would have no zero pairs. So anytime you're adding 2 of the same thing, 2 positives like this one or 2 negatives like this one, you're going to end up with no zero pairs. Okay, let's try some more here. So let's try negative 2 plus positive 4. So first off, here are my 2 negatives. Negative 2. I'm going to add 4 positives. 1, 2, 3, 4 positives. I'm going to identify where the 0 pairs are. So in this case, we have 2 0 pairs. My wife just walked in the room to say hello. We have those 2 0 pairs. What's left over are these 2 positives. So if you add -2 to +4, you end up with 2 positives. That's your answer. You had 2 more. Remember, our method is, which do you have more of? You had 2 more positives than how many negatives you had. All right, we're on a roll here. Let's try another one. -5 plus +2. Make that positive look a little better. All right, so let's put in our 5 negatives. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 negatives. And our 2 positives. So those 2 cancel out. That's a 0 pair. Those 2 cancel out. Again, just like the last problem, 2 0 pairs. And what's left over are these 3 negatives. So what do we have more of? We have more negatives. How many more? We have 3 more. All right, there's one more problem in this row on your practice sheet. And our last one for this row is -4 plus +4. So we have 4 negatives, and we have 4 positives. We circle all the 0 pairs. So in this case, we ended up with 4 0 pairs. Notice there is nothing left over. If you look out here, let me get my orange. If you look out here, there's nothing in that. There are no extras of any kind out here, which means our answer is 0. This is a case, once you write this down on your paper, this is a case of adding opposites. Adding opposites equals 0. And that's not the best view I've ever made, but that's all right. Adding opposites equal 0. Anytime you add a number, -4, to its opposite, +4, you're going to get 0. So -12 plus +12 is going to give you 0. +5 plus -5 is going to give you 0. All right, let's take a look at the next set on your paper. Okay, so go to the next row on your sheet, and we're going to look at these 3 problems. +8 plus -5, -4 plus -6, and -7 plus +4. So go ahead, pause the video, try those 3 problems, and then turn the video back on. Now, if you're still not really sure how to do it, go ahead and watch these 3 problems, and then get ready to pause when we get to the next row on your worksheet. Okay, so let's take a look. First problem, +8, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You should have had 8 positives, plus 5 negatives, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That would give you 5 0 pairs. Get all those circled, and let's identify those. 5 0 pairs. And what you should have had left over were these 3 positives, and that is our answer. Our answer is +3. Negative 4 plus negative 6. So we have four negatives. There they are, the first four. Then we have 6 more negatives. How many zero pairs? Well, in this case, there are no zero pairs. There's nothing that is canceling out. So since there is nothing that is canceling out, all of that is our answer, which makes our answer negative 10. If you add 4 negatives to 6 more negatives, you get 10 negatives. Okay, last one on this row. We have negative 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And we have positive 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4, which means we have got 4 zero pairs right there. So 4 zero pairs. And we have these 3 negatives left. So our answer is negative 3. Okay, so you're going to go ahead and you are going to go to the next row on your paper. So here's that next row on your paper. You have these 3 problems. Negative 10 plus positive 3. And you have the problem positive 9 plus negative 5. And finally, negative 2 plus negative 5. So go ahead, pause the video, do those 3 problems, and then come back and we'll discuss those. All right, so you should have been pausing the video and solving these problems. If you haven't done that yet, do it now. Pause the video and solve these. Okay, let's go ahead and do these together. So, first problem, we have 10 negatives. And let me get my negative color out here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You can see that after a while you want a method for doing this that doesn't require you to draw everything out. If you've looked at some of the problems on the last row of this sheet, you've got a lot to draw if you're going to draw things. So 10 negatives, 3 positives. That gives us 3 zero pairs. So 3 zero pairs, which means that all of that is left. So if you count that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, we have negative 7 as our answer. That's how much is left over. Positive 9 plus negative 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 positives, 5 negatives. Those cancel, 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 cancel. 5 zero pairs. And what's left over are these, whoops, need my leftover color. What's left over are those 4 positives. So our answer is positive 4. And finally, negative 2, 2 negatives, plus 5 more negatives. Well, there's nothing to cancel here. There are no zero pairs on this at all. Nothing to cancel out, which means all of that is left over, and our answer is negative 7. Okay, you have one more row of these to do. So go ahead, let's get that row written in, and then you should solve those problems. Pause the video, solve those problems before you come back and look at that last section of the video to correct your last row. Okay, so this last batch are some problems with bigger numbers, and by now we're getting to a point where we should be able to do this without always drawing those figures. So which do you have more of? If you look at this problem, you should see, let's go back. Let's just take a trip back here through the problems we've done. So here, in this very first problem we did, there were 3 zero pairs. See that -3? That was the smaller number. We had 3 negatives, so we could only create 3 zero pairs because we can only create 0 pairs for whichever we have the smallest amount of. Over here on the next, we had the same situation. We had 2 positives. We had 6 negatives, so we can only create 2 zero pairs because we only have 2 things to cancel out. On this problem, we had no 0 pairs because there was nothing to cancel out. Everything was negatives. Everything was the same kind of thing. Here we go. This was your second row. 2 negatives plus 4 positives, 2 zero pairs. So this amount that we had the smallest number of right here told us how many 0 pairs we were going to have. Next problem the same way, -5 plus 2. That was the smallest amount of things we had, so that told us how many 0 pairs there would be. -4 and +4, well, those are both the same, so they created 4 0 pairs because those were identical. There were the same amount. Over on the next row, we had +8 plus -5. Well, here are our 5 negatives. They created 5 0 pairs. -4 plus -6, no 0 pairs. -7 and +4, 4 positives. We had less positives, so those 4 could cancel 4, leaving what was left. So the 0 pairs are always going to be the smallest amount if there are different things, if there are negatives and positives. If they're all negatives, then there won't be any 0 pairs. So here's the connection again. We had 3 positives and 10 negatives, so we had 3 0 pairs. Here we had 9 positives, that was the bigger number of things. 5 negatives, we had fewer negatives, so they created the 5 0 pairs. And then this one created no 0 pairs. So looking at this batch, we have 12 positives and 16 negatives, which means we will have 12 0 pairs These will cancel out 12 of those, and we will have 4 negatives left over. So which do we have more of? Well, we have more negatives. How many more? We have 4 more, because 12 were canceled out. So let's do the same thing here. And here's another way that you can think about this. You can ask yourself 2 questions. Question 1, which do you have more of? In this case, we have more negatives. If we were drawing them out, we would see 21 negatives and only 13 positives. So we have more negatives. That's going to be the sign of the answer. And then the second thing you ask yourself is, how many more? Well, this would create 13 0 pairs. So since that would create 13 0 pairs, these 13 would cancel out 13 of the negatives, and that would leave us with 8. So our final answer is -8. So go ahead, pause again for a minute. If if that's now clicking in your head and you're going, oh, now see, I didn't know how to do this, and I didn't want to draw 43 positives and 52 negatives, but now I understand it, go ahead and pause for a moment and do that last problem. Okay, so you have 43 positives and 52 negatives. What do you have more of? Well, you have more negatives. There are 52. If you drew these out, you would see 52 negatives drawn out and only 43 positives. So that tells you the sign of your answer. Your answer is going to be a negative. Question 2, how many more negatives? Well, that's where the zero pairs come in. This is going to create, this problem will create 43 zero pairs, which means 43 will be canceled out. Well, 52 is 9 more than 43, so there will be 9 left over. I can do it just like this. 52, take away 43. You got to borrow from that. You have to regroup. 12 take away 3 is 9. That's a 0, so there are 9 more. So we end up with negative 9. Okay, now if you're starting to say, oh, this is clicking, I wish I had a chance to practice more, just turn that paper over. There's more practice on the back. Okay, now it's time to start proving that you can solve bigger problems. Prove to yourself, big problems aren't going to be an issue for you. So on that first row on the back, you've got 3 problems that have numbers big enough you wouldn't want to have to draw all of the pluses for the positives and the negative signs. So we're going to solve those bigger problems using this method right here. We're going to ask ourselves these 2 questions. Which do you have more of? How many more? You're going to still identify the zero pairs. Okay, so let's try this first problem. Now, if you have not already tried this problem on your own, pause the video, do this problem, and then turn the video back on, and we'll go over it together. You're going to do these 2 steps. Which do you have more of? How many more? All right, so when you look at this, you can see 34 negatives, 60 positives. There are more positives. So we know our answer is positive. How many more? That's step 2. Well, to figure out how many more, we do subtraction. We don't care which is the positive, which is the negative. We just take the big number, subtract the small number, because we already know our answer is going to be positive. So let's borrow from this. We're going to regroup. Make that a 10. 10 take away 4 is 6. 5 take away 3 is 2. And we know we have 26. How many zero pairs were in that? Right here. That tells us that there were 34 zero pairs. Go ahead and note that on your paper so you have that information. That's going to help you again understand this concept better. Okay, so that was our final answer for this one. Let's go ahead, make a little space right here, make a little dividing line, and write down, or I'm going to write down, the next problem. This is already on your paper. Go ahead and solve that problem using the same 2 steps. Which do you have more of? How many more? And be sure you identify the zero pairs. So pause until you do that, and then come back to look at the solution. All right, so step 1, which do you have more of? Well, there are 13 positives and 20 negatives. If you drew all those out, you would have more negatives. So that's the which do you have more of. The second step is how many more? Well, you have 20 negatives, take away the 13 positives, take away 13 from 20, you get 7. Your answer is -7, and you should have identified that there were 13 zero pairs. 13 cancellations And when you cancel out 13 of both of these, you have 7 left over. All right, one more for you to do. There you go. Go ahead. This is on your paper. Go ahead and pause. Do this problem. And then turn the video back on. All right. So, which do you have more of? Well, you only have negatives, so obviously you have more negatives. Everything here is a negative. How many more? Well, since this is a case where they're all negatives, we're going to add these together. Anytime you have all the same thing, you're going to add them together, and we get a final answer of negative 68. And as far as zero pairs go, since they're all the same thing, there was nothing to cancel. So in this case, there are no zero pairs. None at all. All right, so let's go ahead and you're going to flip over or you're going to go to the next row, I should say, and there's going to be a chance for some more practice. For these next 3, the numbers are small enough that if you want to draw the positive and negative signs, you can, or if you want to use the which do you have more of, how many more method, you can do that. So do whatever's comfortable for you to get the right answer. I'm going to split it up in my explanations of them. The first one, this one, negative 8 plus positive 13. I'm going to do the which do you have more of method. So which do I have more of? Well, I have more positives because I have 13 positives and only 8 negatives. So I know my answer is going to be positive. How many more? Well, 13 take away the 8 is 5. So I know that I have positive 5 as an answer. And I also know that I have 8 zero pairs because I had 8 negatives to cancel out some of the positives, but not all the positives. There were 5 positives left over. All right, on the next one. And remember, if you haven't solved these already, don't just watch the answers. Pause the video, solve them, and then come back. Positive 6 plus negative 5. All right, I've got 6 positives. And I have 5 negatives, which means I've got 5 zero pairs. 1, 2, 3, 4. 5 zero pairs. I have this one positive left over, which means my answer is positive 1. And for the last one here, we've got a problem that looks a little different, but really we're going to solve it the same. We have positive 11 plus negative 7 plus positive 2. So when we have a problem like this, we're going to put together the things that are the same kind. So we have 11 positives and 2 positives. So you can even think of it as rewriting the problem like this. Because since it's addition, doesn't matter what order you add it in. That's true with every addition problem. So we can combine these two and see that we have 13 positives and we're adding that to 7 negatives. And then I can do my steps. Which do I have more of? Well, I have more positives because there are 13 positives and only 7 negatives. How many more do I have? Well, I've got 13 positives, 7 negatives, and the difference between those, since they're different kinds of things, the difference between those is 6. So my answer is positive 6, and this negative 7, since there were fewer negatives, that tells me that I had 7 zero pairs. Okay, so now you have 9 more problems. And on those 9 problems, what you should really do is you should solve them all if you're ready to solve them all. do that. If you're not ready to solve them all and look at the answers, then solve them step by step. But if you feel like I really get this, you can go ahead, solve all 9, and then fast forward through to check the answers. Okay, so let's go through these 9 problems that are left. And again, if you need to pause to solve a problem or to resolve a problem after you see one done that you got wrong and you realize, oh, I was thinking about it a little bit incorrectly, I should stop and I should check my work on the others, do that. Take the time to do that. That's much better than just sitting and watching me solve problems. So positive 17 plus negative 22, I'm going to answer those 2 questions. The first question, which do I have more of? I have more negatives. That becomes the sign of my answer. The second question, how many more? Well, 22, take away 17 is 5. So I know my answer is negative 5. And I know that I had 17 zero pairs. I had 17 places where the positive and the negative canceled each other out. On this next problem, I have 105 negatives plus 130 positives. So which do I have more of? There are more positives there, 130 compared to 105. How many more? Well, if I take that away, I end up with 25. So my answer is positive 25. And in this case, I had 105 zero pairs. Boy, it's a good thing I'm not having to write all those out. I would hate to have to write out 130 positive signs and then cancel it with 105 negative signs. On this last one, I think here I'll go ahead and draw mine just to keep myself fresh on that. So I have 4 positives, then I have 8 negatives. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And I have 1 more negative. So I'm actually going to think about putting these together first. So I'm going to end up with 9 negatives. I made that last negative pretty big, so I'm going to go ahead and get rid of it. There's my 8th one. There's the 9th one. I have 4 zero pairs. And I have 5 negatives left over. And those 5 negatives left over are my answer, negative 5. Okay, we're on a roll here. 3 negatives plus 7 positives. Which do I have more of? I have more positives. How many more? I have 4 more, because 7 take away 3 is 4. 22 negatives plus 22 positives, plus 13 negatives plus 10 negatives. I'm going to combine all of that first. That's going to be my first step. So when I do that, I end up with 13 negatives and 10 more negatives, 23 negatives, bring down the 22 positives I started with. So 22 positives plus 23 negatives, well, I can see that I have 1 more negative, and that is my answer. Let me go back and circle that. And here I had 22 zero pairs. I didn't do it back on this problem. Here I had 3 zero pairs. And the reason why it's good to keep track of the zero pairs is that tells you how many you're taking away from the other one. The 0 pairs is always the smaller amount. That shows you what you're taking away. All right, last one over here. I can look already and tell myself, well, I'm going to have 15 0 pairs here because I only have 15 positives and I'm trying to cancel out negatives. I can't cancel them all out, but I can cancel out 15 of them because the 35 Take away the 15 means I have 20 more of what? Well, 20 more of negatives. I had 35 negatives, 15 positives, so I have more negatives. How many more? 20 more. All right, we're on the last set of the practice here. Okay, I have 6 positives, 4 negatives, and 3 positives. This is one where I would go ahead and I would rewrite the problem and put the similar things together. So I can then go ahead and think of those together. So that's 9 positives plus 4 negatives. And I'll answer my 2 questions. Which do I have more of? I have more positives. I'll go back to the original problem. How many more? Well, 9 is 5 more than 4. And that's my answer. Positive 8 plus negative 10. Which do you have more of? More negatives. How many more? 2 more. And I need to go back and identify. Back on this one, by the way, let's do this. Here we had 8 zero pairs. Here we'd look at this line and we'd see 9 positives and 4 negatives. That meant there were 4 zero pairs. All right, the very last problem. So, step 1, combine the things that are alike. Well, they're already laid out together. So I have 11 positives and 8 and 3 is 11 negatives, which means I have 0 because the 11 positives and the 11 negatives will totally cancel each other out. Which do you have more of? I don't have more. They're the same. Anytime they're the same, you have 0. And when you have 0, you also know that you had no 0 pairs. There were no things to cancel out. Okay, you should feel, if you've been doing these problems and you've been getting them right, you should feel super confident now on adding integers. And the next thing we'll do is we're going to subtract integers. That'll come in the next lesson. Here's the good news. Once you understand how to add integers, subtracting is super easy. There's just one more step. Okay? Come to class with any questions you have.